When you live on the edge of town, surrounded by open fields and nothing but wind for company, you get used to quiet. My farm wasn't much. 50 acres of fence, a few horses, 2 old barns, and a pond that reflected the sunrise like a secret I never wanted to share. After 20 years of hard work, I'd finally built a place where peace wasn't just a word. It was a way of life. Then the HOA came knocking. It started small like most infections do. A letter in my mailbox, stamped with the new community association seal. Dear resident, your property appears to be in violation of neighborhood standards. Please remove unauthorized fencing. I stared at it for a full minute before laughing out loud. My farm sat on unincorporated land, outside any HOA jurisdiction. Always had. Always would. The letter wasn't just wrong, it was nonsense. But the letter wasn't signed by the board. It was signed by Karen Blake, president, Maple Creek HOA. That was the first time I heard her name. It wouldn't be the last. 2 days later, I saw her in person. Her SUV was polished to mirror brightness, parked half a foot into my driveway like she owned the gravel beneath it. She stepped out in a tailored blazer, clipboard in hand, and the kind of sunglasses people wear when they want to be obeyed, not liked. Morning, she said with a smile sharp enough to cut wire. I'm here to talk about your boundary fence. I leaned against the post, wiping sweat from my brow. You mean the one that's been here since before half these houses existed? She tilted her head, that rehearsed kindness faltering for a split second. You're within the Maple Creek jurisdiction now, Mr. Harding, I said flatly. And no, I'm not. She ignored that. The board has received several complaints about the condition of your property. Unregistered livestock, unauthorized perimeter fencing, and possible unapproved water features. I blinked. That's a pond, ma'am. Nature made it herself. Karen scribbled something on her clipboard like I confessed to a felony. We'll review this at our next board meeting. Expect formal notice. That was the day I realized something dangerous. Karen didn't just believe she had power. She believed she was the law. The next week, I found 3 new letters in my mailbox. One about the barn color not matching community standards, another about noise from farm equipment, and a third warning me about livestock waste violating sanitation guidelines. All printed, official-looking, but signed by anyone except Karen Blake. I drove to the HOA office myself, a little 1-story brick building near the main subdivision. The receptionist froze when she saw me. You're from the Harding property? Yeah, I said. The one outside your map lines. Her eyes darted to the back room. Ms. Blake isn't here right now. Then tell Ms. Blake I'm not paying a single dime for her fantasy rules. When I turned to leave, I noticed something taped to the lobby corkboard. A new map of Maple Creek's jurisdiction. The outer boundary line had been redrawn and now included my property. That's when it hit me. Karen wasn't confused. She was rewriting the lines. By the end of that month, she'd turned my life into paperwork hell. Inspectors from the board trespassed on my land, snapping photos of my barn and counting fence posts. One afternoon, I caught a man measuring the distance between my gate and the road. When I asked what he was doing, he muttered, Karen said this is HOA perimeter maintenance. I told him to leave or I'd call the sheriff. He didn't argue. That evening, another letter arrived. Notice of noncompliance. Fine, $1,500. Payment due in 10 days. That was the moment the anger started burning low in my chest. Because it wasn't about money, it was about power. And Karen Blake had plenty of that. Her husband, Derek, was a retired city cop turned private security consultant. Her best friend sat on the local zoning committee. Every lever she could pull, she did. I filed complaints with the county. They stalled. I called the zoning office. They passed me around like a bad penny. Every official I spoke to said the same thing. We'll look into it. Nobody ever did. So I started keeping records. I logged every letter, every trespass, every fake notice. Installed cameras facing the fence line. Because deep down, I knew something worse was coming. And I was right. The morning the patrol team arrived, I thought it was another delivery. 2 white trucks rolled up to my gate. No markings except small magnetic decals that read Maple Creek, HOA enforcement. The men who stepped out weren't inspectors. They were big, uniformed, and carrying bolt cutters. I walked out slowly, phone already recording. Morning, boys, I said. Something I can help you with? The tallest one adjusted his cap. Routine property inspection. HOA authorization. On private farmland? I said. Not a chance. He didn't even look at me. He bent down and clipped the chain on my gate. Metal clanged against gravel. That sound, it's hard to describe. Like someone cracking open your safe and staring inside your life. Step back, sir, the man said. I didn't. I raised my phone higher. You just committed trespass on camera. That's when Karen's SUV appeared, rolling up behind them. She stepped out, calm and smug, like a general arriving to inspect her troops. This doesn't have to get messy, she said sweetly. If you just cooperate, we could resolve this quietly. Cooperate with what? I snapped. Your imaginary laws? Her smile didn't move. We've already spoken with county enforcement. You're in violation of multiple ordinances. I pointed at my camera. Good. Tell that to the sheriff. Her eyebrow twitched. Sheriff. I smiled. He's inside. Because what Karen didn't know, and what would change everything that morning, was that Sheriff Brown, my old friend from the force, was sitting in my kitchen having coffee when the trucks arrived. He'd been investigating a string of fake property citations around the county. My case wasn't the first. As soon as the cutters hit that chain, I saw his silhouette in the doorway. Broad shoulders, badge gleaming. Karen's smirk faltered when she saw him step outside. Morning, Sheriff Brown said, voice steady as steel. Somebody want to tell me why the Maple Creek HOA is breaking into private land? Karen tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Her men froze. The sheriff held up a hand. Before anyone lies, he said, I suggest you take a good look at the boundary marker. He pointed toward the rusted post I'd shown him weeks earlier. Clear as day. The county survey mark etched in concrete, proving my property sat outside the HOA. Karen's lips parted, but no sound came out. The sheriff turned to me. You got that footage saved? Multiple angles, I said, including audio. He nodded once. Good. We'll need that for evidence. And that was the exact moment Karen Blake realized her empire wasn't invincible. The sheriff stood in the driveway, boots sinking into my damp gravel, his hand resting easy on his belt, but his eyes sharp as cut glass. You could feel the balance of power shift right then. One man, calm and quiet, staring down a woman who'd built her throne out of fear and paperwork. Karen tried to recover. Sheriff Brown, she said, summoning that syrupy voice she used at HOA meetings and fundraisers. There must be some misunderstanding. Our board received several reports. Reports? Brown interrupted. From who? She blinked, caught off guard. Anonymous community complaints. We're within our jurisdiction to investigate possible code violations. He looked at the bolt cutters still hanging from one of her patrol's hands. By cutting through a private gate? Silence. The only sound was the drip of dew falling from the fence line. Brown stepped forward, his shadow spilling over the gravel. You know what I call that, Ms. Blake? Breaking and entering. Karen's smile cracked. Sheriff, I assure you. He held up a hand. You can assure me later. For now, everyone's going to step back behind that gate. We're preserving a crime scene. Her patrol didn't move. Big guys, ex-security, maybe off-duty friends of her husband. One of them shifted his weight like he was deciding if it was worth arguing. Brown's deputy, a younger officer named Hale, stepped out from his cruiser and rested a hand on his holster. Not threatening, just a reminder that this wasn't a debate. That did the trick. The men stepped back. The sheriff motioned toward me. You got your gate camera footage? Yup, I said, scrolling on my phone. They clipped the chain at exactly 9:43 a.m. He nodded, taking a long look at the timestamp. Good. Keep that safe. Don't post it. Don't share it. Let me handle this. Karen finally snapped out of her stunned silence. Sheriff, please, this is getting blown out of proportion. My husband and I. Brown's eyes narrowed. Derek Blake. Yes, she said quickly. He's been advising our security team. Funny, the sheriff muttered. I've been meaning to talk to him about that. Her posture stiffened, and I could see her mask starting to slip, the charm fading, the control cracking. Brown turned to his deputy. Get statement from him in, note the bolt cutter serial, and bag that chain. I want all of this logged before noon. Karen's jaw clenched. This is harassment. No, Brown said evenly. This is due process. Something you might want to learn about. He walked past her toward his cruiser, but paused beside me. Cole, he said quietly. Don't engage her. Don't respond to any more letters. I'll dig. You stay calm. I nodded. You think she's working alone? He smirked, that kind of grim smile lawmen wear when they already know the answer. Nobody with that kind of arrogance ever works alone. That afternoon, the neighborhood app exploded. Photos of Karen's HOA patrol at my gate, the sheriff's cruiser parked on the dirt road, the yellow tape over my fence. Everybody was talking. Some called it farm drama. Others said, about time someone stood up to her. By sundown, I got 3 texts from neighbors I barely knew. Hey man, Karen's been messing with us too. She fined me for a non-existent trash violation. She made my wife cry at a board meeting. The pattern was clear. She'd bullied half the community into silence. Only difference was, my fence wasn't inside her kingdom. She just didn't know how to stop pretending it was. Around 7:30 p.m., as the sun melted behind the barn, my phone buzzed again. It was Sheriff Brown. Cole, he said, voice low but clipped. You're not going to believe what I found. What's that? She's been filing HOA citations under a new subdivision charter, one that doesn't exist in the county records. I frowned. How's that possible? She registered herself, he said. Maple Creek Extension. Fake boundary map. Fake signatures. Fake county approval stamp. Classic paper fraud. I laughed, half in disbelief, half in rage. So, she basically invented a new jurisdiction. Looks that way, Brown said. And she's been using it to collect fees, issue fines, even hire private enforcement. But here's the kicker. Derek's name shows up on every payment authorization. Her husband, the ex-cop, the one who always stood behind her at meetings like her personal bodyguard. Think he's in on it? I asked. I don't think, Brown said grimly. I know. The next day, Karen changed tactics. When people like her lose control, they go for reputation. By noon, she posted a long message in the neighborhood group chat. Due to recent misunderstandings with an uncooperative property owner outside our jurisdiction, the HOA has been forced to involve law enforcement. We ask residents to remain calm and support the board's efforts to maintain safety and community values. She didn't name me, but she didn't have to. Every neighbor knew who she meant. My phone lit up with messages, some supportive, others nosy. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the post straight to Brown. His response came back 2 minutes later. Good. Let her talk. Every word's another nail. By Friday, things got strange. 2 men in black jackets were parked across from my farm entrance, engine idling. No markings, no plates, just watching. While I walked out with my camera, they drove off. That night, a drone buzzed over my property, low enough to rattle the horses. I recorded it, zoomed in on the blinking green light, and caught a partial registration number. Guess who it belonged to? Derek Blake. That was the moment the sheriff decided to stop playing defense. He called me the next morning. Cole, I'm coming by. I need a place to work quietly. Karen's holding a board meeting tonight, and I want to hear what's really being planned. You're thinking wire? I asked. He chuckled. Something like that. You just make sure your gate's open for me. Let's see who thinks they can patrol a lawman's turf. By evening, his cruiser sat tucked behind my barn, lights off, radio silent. He came in through the back door, nodded to my wife, and poured himself a mug of coffee like he'd lived there all his life. You sure you want to get in the middle of this circus? I asked. Brown smiled over his cup. Son, I don't get in the middle. I end them. Around 9 p.m., he drove out, not in uniform, but wearing an old jacket and a ball cap. Going undercover? I teased. Let's call it attendance, he said, sliding into his pickup. If Karen's got plans, tonight's the night she'll say them out loud. The next few hours were the longest of my life. The farm was quiet except for the crickets and the creak of the windmill. I sat by the window, watching the road for headlights, replaying every moment of the last week in my head. The letters, the gate, the lies, all of it was leading somewhere. At 11:14 p.m., my phone buzzed with a single text from Brown. She's calling in her patrol team. Says they're going to reclaim the property by force tomorrow morning. She's bragging Derek cleared it with his old contacts. Lock everything. I'll be inside before dawn. I didn't sleep. Not even a minute. By 5 a.m., fog rolled low across the pasture. The horses stirred restlessly. I could hear the hum of engines on the distant road, the kind that move in formation. Brown was already in the kitchen, sipping black coffee, eyes fixed on the security monitor. 5 trucks, he muttered. 4 men each. That's not a patrol, that's a raid. I swallowed hard. You think they're really going to try it? He smiled faintly, hand resting on his badge. I'm counting on it. The fog that morning was thick enough to taste damp, cold, and quiet. You could barely see the fence from the porch, but I could hear them before I saw them. The low hum of truck engines, the crunch of gravel, the occasional bark of a radio. Karen's patrol had arrived right on schedule. Sheriff Brown stood beside me in his plain jacket, coffee mug steaming in his hand. You'd never know he was armed. Never know he'd already called 2 unmarked units waiting half a mile down the road. He was calm, too calm. The kind of calm that only comes from knowing the ending before the story starts. Showtime, he murmured. I nodded, trying to steady my breathing. You sure about this, Sheriff? They sound serious. He gave a slow grin. That's what makes it fun. Through the fog, the first silhouette emerged, Karen's silver SUV. It crawled down the dirt road, like a predator that thought it owned the field. Behind it followed 4 pickup trucks, each loaded with men in matching black jackets that said Maple Creek Security Unit. The letters were ironed on, not official, probably ordered online. But the rifles slung over their shoulders? Real. My heart thudded. They're armed, I whispered. Let them be, Brown said, voice even. We're not the ones trespassing. The convoy stopped in front of my gate, the same one they cut through last week. Karen's door opened with a slam. She stepped out in heels in the mud, waving her clipboard like a royal decree. Everyone in position, she barked. We're seizing this property under community jurisdiction. Community jurisdiction. Those 2 words hit me like a slap. She'd really convinced herself this was law. I glanced at Brown. He didn't move, didn't even blink. Then 2 of her men stepped forward, yanking out bolt cutters again. The metallic clank echoed through the fog. That's when Brown set down his coffee cup. He walked forward slow, deliberate, through the mist like a ghost coming home. Morning, gentlemen, he called out. They froze, startled. You could see the moment their confidence cracked, like dogs suddenly unsure if the fence is electric. Who the hell are you? One of them barked, hand twitching toward his sidearm. Brown smiled. County Sheriff, and you're about 5 seconds from a felony. Karen turned, and when she saw him, her whole body stiffened. Sheriff Brown, she shouted, her voice high, fake sweet. We were just performing a community inspection. He raised his badge, the silver glint cutting through the fog. An inspection? With rifles and bolt cutters. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Step away from a gate, Brown said. All of you. The patrolman hesitated. You could tell they weren't used to being challenged. Definitely not by someone with authority they couldn't manipulate. Brown's deputy Hale emerged from the fog then, hand on his radio. Dispatch, he said into the mic, confirming visual. Suspects attempting unlawful entry, private property. Proceeding with detainment. Karen's eyes went wide. Detainment? Sheriff, please. There's been a mistake. Yeah, Brown said, his voice like gravel. Yours. He nodded at Hale. Cuff the first 2. The sound of metal clicking against wrists cut through the fog like thunder. The rest of her so-called patrol backed up fast, their bravado evaporating. Karen stumbled forward, desperate. You can't do this. My husband has contacts in the department. Brown tilted his head. You mean Derek Blake? The same Derek who's under investigation for document fraud and illegal contracting? Her face drained of color. I'd say his contacts are a little disconnected. The fog began to lift, revealing the full picture. My property line, the broken gate, the trucks lined up like a failed invasion. Brown motioned for me to step forward. Cole, he said, you got your phone ready? I held it up. Recording. Good. You're about to witness what we call a lawful takedown. He turned to Karen. You want to explain to these men why you forged county paperwork? Why you filed an HOA charter for land that isn't yours? Karen's lips trembled. Those documents were approved. By who? She hesitated. My husband. He works with the city. Not anymore, he doesn't, Brown cut in. He's sitting in my office right now, answering questions about falsified permits. Her jaw dropped. You're lying. Try me, he said. The entire scene shifted then. The power, the control, the arrogance. It drained out of her like water through a sieve. She took one shaky step backward, eyes darting from Brown to the men, now being led toward police cruisers. I just wanted order, she stammered. The community needs leadership. You mean control, Brown said flatly. You build a fake empire on Real land, Ms. Blake. That's not leadership. That's theft. The sirens started faint at first, then grew louder as two marked units crested the hill. Lights painted the fog red and blue, flashing across the fields. Deputies poured out, efficient and calm, handcuffing the remaining patrol and reading off rights. Brown walked through the chaos like a conductor leading a symphony. Karen turned to me, wild-eyed. You think this is over? You think the HOA will just disappear? I sipped what was left of my cold coffee. I think you already did. She lunged like she might grab me, but Hale stepped between us, firm and unshakable. Ma'am, step back. You don't understand, she screamed. He's ruining everything. He's filming, I said, raising my phone. And I'll be emailing this to every homeowner you find. For a moment, the only sound was her breathing, heavy, broken, furious. Then Brown spoke softly, like he was reading her final line. You thought you could run this town, Ms. Blake, but you forgot one thing about small counties. He looked at me, then back at her. We talked. They loaded her into the cruiser as the sun finally burned through the last of the fog. The light hit her SUV, still parked at the gate. Mud splattered across the side where her tires had spun uselessly. Brown stood beside me, hands on his hips. You did good, Cole. You kept calm. I nodded, still processing it all. Can't believe it's finally over. He gave a slow nod. Almost. I asked. He turned toward the horizon. Karen's just the noise. Derek's the hand behind it. And something tells me those fake charters weren't just about power. They were about money. Later that afternoon, when the cruisers were gone and the farm had gone quiet again, I walked down to the gate. The metal was twisted, chain cut in two, but I didn't feel angry anymore. Just tired. Tired, but relieved. From the hilltop, I could see a few neighbors gathered at the end of the road, watching. They waved, some for the first time ever. Guess they finally knew the truth. That night, Brown came back by, a folder tucked under his arm. Preliminary findings, he said, setting it on my table. You're going to want to see this. Inside were photos, documents, fake permits, and wire transfers. HOA dues funneled through a shell company under Derek Blake's name. Tens of thousands gone. Looks like your HOA was more of a laundering front, he said. I stared at the papers, then back at him. You think they'll go to prison? Brown smirked. Let's just say I'm ordering new handcuffs. As he left that night, he stopped at the door. Oh, and Cole, lock that gate again. I doubt she'll be back, but sometimes power doesn't die easy. I nodded. Thanks, Sheriff. He smiled, stepping into the dark. Just doing my job. The taillights faded into the distance, leaving me alone with the crickets and the whisper of the wind across the pasture. For the first time in weeks, the farm felt like mine again. The next morning, the farm was quiet, eerily quiet. No Karen, no patrol trucks, no letters taped to the gate. Just the sound of wind in the trees and the creak of my old barn door swinging slow. I walked out with my coffee, half expecting to see her silver SUV waiting on the road like some ghost that refused to die. But all that remained were muddy tire tracks and broken chain links scattered like relics of a bad dream. For the first time in months, I could breathe. But peace never lasts long when the truth's been buried this deep. By noon, Sheriff Brown called. Cole, he said, his tone low, you might want to turn on Channel 7. I grabbed the remote, flipped the TV on, and there it was, breaking news. Local HOA president arrested for fraud and illegal seizure attempts. The screen showed Karen, in yesterday's clothes, being led into the county courthouse. The camera caught her mid-yell, eyes wild, shouting something about misunderstood authority. The anchor's voice cut in, cool and precise. Authorities confirmed that HOA President Karen Blake is under investigation for multiple counts of trespassing, property damage, and misappropriation of community funds. Her husband, city contractor Derek Blake, is also being questioned by federal investigators for involvement in falsified permits and laundering of homeowner fees. I leaned back in my chair, speechless. Brown hadn't been exaggerating. The whole town was watching the fall. By that evening, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Neighbors who had avoided me for months suddenly wanted to talk. "Cole, you were right all along. She fined us for grass height. Turns out she was pocketing the money. I can't believe we all signed those forms." Every call, every message, carried the same mix of guilt and relief. The spell Karen had over this community was finally broken. Then came the reporters. Around sunset, 2 vans pulled up to my driveway, lights flaring, cameras pointed straight at me. A young journalist with a nervous smile approached. "Mr. Harding, Channel 7, can we get a comment about what happened on your property yesterday?" I almost said no, but then I thought about all the fines, the fake letters, the trespassing, and the smugness I'd endured for months. I nodded. "Sure," I said, calm and steady. "Tell them this. I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace. And sometimes peace needs a witness." Her camera light blinked on, and I told the story. Every detail, from the fake inspection notices to the night patrols, all the way up to the moment the sheriff stepped out of my fog-covered driveway like judgment itself. By the time I was done, her jaw was slack. "You recorded everything?" she asked. I smiled faintly. Every frame. That night, the footage hit the internet. Within hours, my quiet little county was trending nationwide. Hashtag HOA Karen, hashtag farm justice, hashtag sheriff versus HOA. Clips of Karen screaming during her arrest flooded social media. Memes popped up, her face photoshopped onto medieval portraits with captions like Queen of Entitlement, dethroned. It would have been funny if it hadn't been so surreal. Watching an entire town wake up to the rot that had been growing under their noses felt like seeing termites scatter when you lift the floorboards. The next few days were a whirlwind. Brown called me back to the station to review the evidence. His office looked like a war room now. Maps, photos, stacks of files, each one thicker than the last. He handed me a folder marked confidential. Inside were spreadsheets, HOA financial reports, and bank statements connecting Derek to a construction firm that didn't exist. Fake invoices, duplicate accounts, even a note in Karen's handwriting. Transfer remaining funds before audit. I exhaled slowly. "How much are we talking?" Brown rubbed the back of his neck. "So far, about 80,000. But that's just from Maple Creek. Looks like they were running the same setup in 2 other neighborhoods." "Jesus," I muttered. "All that money for what?" He gave me a sideways look. "Power. Same reason people like her always do it." Later that week, the county held an emergency town meeting. It was supposed to be routine until the sheriff showed up with half his department and a box full of evidence. I went too, mostly out of curiosity. The community hall was packed, people standing shoulder to shoulder, whispering, tense. The same neighbors who once glared at me for mowing outside HOA-approved hours now looked at me with something close to admiration. Brown took the podium and dropped the bomb. He laid out everything. The fake HOA charter, the illegal patrols, the fraud, the wire transfers. When he finished, you could have heard a pin drop. Then, slowly, people started to clap. It wasn't wild applause, more like exhausted gratitude. For the first time in years, they were free. Karen's vice president, a frail man named Ed, tried to speak up. We didn't know. She told us everything was legitimate." Brown stared him down. "Then maybe next time, Ed, read before you sign." Laughter rippled through the room. It wasn't cruel, just honest. That night, as I walked back to my truck, a woman stopped me. I recognized her. She lived 2 streets over. "Mr. Harding," she said quietly. "Thank you." I smiled. "For what?" "For standing your ground. We all wanted to. You just did it first." Her words stuck with me the whole drive home. Sometimes, courage doesn't look like a fight. It looks like saying no when everyone else shrugs. The next morning, I found a letter in my mailbox, this time official. Stamped with the county seal, not the HOA's cheap ink. It was for Sheriff Brown. Cole, just thought you'd like to know. Karen's being charged with fraud, conspiracy, trespassing, and unlawful seizure of property. Derek's facing embezzlement and forgery. The county prosecutor says they'll both do time. Thought you deserved to hear it from me first. B. I set the letter down on my kitchen table and just laughed. Not out of mockery, out of relief. Months of tension, fear, and anger, all evaporated in a single paragraph of justice. Out the window, my land stretched wide and quiet, morning mist curling off the fields. For the first time in a long while, it felt like mine again. That evening, I drove into town to grab supplies. Every store clerk, every neighbor I passed had something to say. Way to go, Cole. You showed that HOA who's boss. You made the county news, man. I didn't feel like a hero, just a guy who finally said enough. At the diner, Brown waved me over to his booth. You've been busy, he joked, sliding a newspaper across the table. The headline read, Sheriff exposes fake HOA fraud. Local farmer's video sparks investigation. He raised his coffee. Guess we make a good team. I chuckled. Guess we do. He leaned back, serious now. You know, Cole, this thing, it's bigger than one bad HOA. It's a reminder that people like Karen thrive because folks get tired. Stop paying attention. Stop pushing back. I nodded slowly. Not anymore. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I drove home down that same dirt road, headlights brushing against the repaired gate. I stopped, stepped out, and ran my hand along the new chain. Strong, solid, locked. For a long time, I just stood there listening to the crickets, the soft hum of the wind through the wheat, and the silence that comes when peace finally takes root. I thought about all the chaos, all the shouting, all the threats, and how, in the end, it wasn't anger that beat them. It was proof. It was patience, and a sheriff who refused to look the other way. 2 weeks passed before the courtroom date was set. By then, the gossip had cooled, the cameras had moved on, and the town had returned to its usual rhythm. But the scars Karen left on this community ran deep. I hadn't planned to attend the hearing. I figured the sheriff's report, the video evidence, and the county audit said enough. But Brown called me the night before. You should come, he said. Closure isn't paperwork, Cole. It's seeing it end. So I went. The courthouse was packed. Local reporters, curious neighbors, even former HOA members sitting stiffly like kids caught cheating on a test. Karen sat at the defendant's table in a pale blazer, her once perfect posture slouched. Derek was beside her, jaw tight, face pale. The confidence they once wore like armor was gone. When the judge entered, the room went still. The charges were read one by one. Fraud, conspiracy, trespassing, destruction of property, unlawful seizure attempt. Each word hit like a gavel of its own. Karen tried to speak, her voice cracking. Your Honor, I never meant. The judge cut her off. You meant to control, Mrs. Blake. You meant to deceive. That much is clear. When Derek's turn came, he didn't say a word, just stared at the table, hands shaking. The evidence was overwhelming. Fake invoices, duplicate accounts, missing community funds. His signature was on everything. By the end of the day, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Karen was sentenced to 18 months with community supervision. Derek got 3 years for embezzlement and document fraud. As they were led away, she turned once, met my eyes across the room. There wasn't anger there anymore, not even hatred. Just disbelief, like she still couldn't understand how her own game had turned against her. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just nodded once, a silent goodbye to a nightmare finally ending. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed again. Mr. Harding, any comments on the verdict? What message do you think this sends to other HOA boards? I paused on the courthouse steps and said, simple. Respect isn't about power. It's about boundaries. You cross someone's line, you pay the price, even if you think you're above it. That quote ran in the paper the next morning, front page. Not because it was clever, but because it was true. The following weeks were quiet, the kind of quiet you can hear. The HOA dissolved completely. The county took over community maintenance until a new, smaller board could be elected, one built on transparency instead of tyranny. For the first time in years, people actually talked to each other without fear of fines. The old group chat once used for Karen's HOA reminders turned into something new: Maple Creek neighbors. It was filled with photos of gardens, yard sales, and kids' lemonade stands. I didn't join at first. I wasn't much for social media. But when Brown added me himself with the caption, "Our local hero," I figured I'd earned a seat at the table. One afternoon, I was out by the barn fixing a fence when a car pulled up. It wasn't one I recognized, an older sedan, paint fading. A woman stepped out, holding a clipboard. For a second, my gut tightened, PTSD, I guess, until I saw her smile. "Mr. Harding? I'm Rachel Myers, the new county community coordinator. We're doing a post-investigation audit, just confirming a few things for record keeping." She was young, polite, and professional. Everything Karen pretended to be. I nodded. "Sure thing. You can look around. Just don't trip over any hidden wires." She laughed softly. "I read your file, sir." You really turned the tables. We talked for a while about property boundaries, maintenance ordinances, and how the county planned to help other neighborhoods avoid this kind of corruption. She told me they'd already disbanded 2 more shady HOAs that were connected to Derek's construction firm. "Looks like your story lit a fire," she said. I smiled faintly. Guess justice likes company. That evening, I sat on my porch watching the sunset bleed across the fields. The same land Karen once tried to claim piece by piece now glowed gold in the light. Brown pulled up in his cruiser, as he often did when he needed quiet. He sat beside me on the steps, handed me a bottle of root beer, and sighed. "Feels good, doesn't it?" "Yeah," I said. "Strange kind of peace. Like a storm that forgot to come back." He chuckled. "You know, the county attorney asked me to pass along something." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a check, restitution for property damage and legal costs. $9,400. I blinked. "That's exact." He grinned. Karen insisted she'd pay it under protest. The judge said fine, but she still had to write it herself. Sure enough, the check bore her signature. A small, trembling thing. For the first time, I actually laughed out loud. As summer came, the farm came back to life. The fence was mended. The cattle grazed where the patrol trucks once tore through. Neighbors began stopping by again, bringing pie, asking advice, sharing stories about their own battles with small-town politics. Jim from the next property overcame by one morning with a grin. Heard they're turning Karen's old house into a daycare center. I raised an eyebrow. "That's poetic." "Yet," he said, "guess it's finally being used for something good." Weeks turned to months, and Maple Creek began to heal. The new board, led by a woman named Marisol, kept everything transparent. Open budgets, fair rules, real accountability. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. One day, Marisol stopped by with her son, maybe 8 years old. He ran around the porch chasing the dog while she handed me a folder. "We're naming this initiative after you," she said. "The Harding Clause. It protects homeowners from unilateral HOA actions. Requires full consent for inspections or property entry." I was stunned. "You didn't have to do that." She smiled. "We wanted to. You reminded everyone that a neighborhood isn't supposed to be ruled. It's supposed to be shared." Later that night, as I sat by the pool, I found myself staring at my reflection. For so long, this place had been a battlefield. Now it was just home again. The wind rustled the leaves, and for a moment, I could almost hear Karen's voice, that clipped, commanding tone, echoing from the past. "You can't fight the HOA, Mr. Harding." I smiled. Guess I did. I thought about everything that had happened. The patrol team, the sheriff, the trial, the silence after the storm. And I realized something I hadn't before. Justice isn't loud. It doesn't always come in sirens or handcuffs or viral videos. Sometimes it's quieter, the steady hum of peace returning where chaos once lived. Sometimes it's just a locked gate that stays locked. When the sun dipped low, I raised my glass to the horizon and whispered, "To boundaries, to proof, to every person who's ever been pushed and decided to push back." And as the crickets started their nightly chorus, the last of the tension finally left my chest. The war was over. The land was mine again. The peace, earned, not borrowed. And for once, even the night felt like it was on my side.